May the great name of the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ be glorified. We are in the series of the wonderful book of Psalms, and today we will be looking at Psalm 6, God's healing in pain and suffering. In Psalm 6, King David was ill. We do not know what his illness was. David was very lonely and not happy. He was ill in body and in mind. In this psalm, David is confessing and repenting of his sin, possibly with Bathsheba. The situation is dire enough that David fears for his life. At least some of his concern is related to his enemies. He thought that God had left him. He thought that God would not help him. Verse 1. O Lord, do not rebuke me in your anger, nor chasten me in your hot displeasure. Verse 2. Have mercy on me, O Lord, for I am weak. O Lord, heal me, for my bones are troubled. Verse 3. My soul also is greatly troubled. But you, O Lord, how long? When God corrects us, it doesn't feel pleasant, but it is good, and it is for our good. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 7 makes it clear that chastening is evidence of our adoption. Good fathers discipline their sons, and David was feeling some pain because of that discipline. In the midst of his chastisement, he cried out to God for mercy. He's asking God to shorten the time of his trouble. Verse 4. Return, O Lord, deliver me. O save me for your mercy's sake. Verse 5. For in death there is no remembrance of you. In the grave, who will give you thanks? David knew that God is merciful and is crying out for God to save him for his mercy's sake. In that statement, he is recognizing that his life is dependent on God, and without God, David is nothing. David is in so much pain that in verse 5, David forgets that he will be with the Lord for eternity, even after death. He's making his case that if he dies, he will not be able to worship God. Verse 6. I am weary with my groaning. All night I make my bed swim. I drench my couch with my tears. Verse 7. My eye wastes away because of grief. It grows old because of my enemies. Verse 8. Depart from me, all of workers of iniquity, for the Lord has heard the voice of my weeping. Verse 6 is a good example of poetic exaggeration. David didn't want us to believe that his bed actually floated on a pool of tears in his room. He's saying here that he has been crying all night. Verse 7 tells us that David's eyes were red and sore from all the tears and lack of sleep. In verse 8, David is asking all the ungodly people to depart from him. David wasn't afraid to cry before the Lord, and God honored the voice of his weeping. Verse 9. The Lord has heard my supplication. The Lord will receive my prayer. Verse 10. Let all my enemies be ashamed and greatly troubled. Let them turn back and be ashamed suddenly. David knows by faith that the Lord has heard his supplication and received his prayer. Sometimes we feel as David felt. We think God has left us. God was really with David all the time. He could not see him through his tears. When God answers David, he tells his enemies to go away. They were probably telling David that God would not answer him. David ended the psalm on a note of confidence. He made his agonized cry to God, and God heard him. If you think that God has left you, pray the words of Psalm 6. God does not answer immediately, so we think like David that God has left us. Keep praying, and one day you will hear his answer. If you have done wrong, then turn away from your sin. Ask God to forgive you. If you have not done wrong, then ask God to make you strong. Come join me in the series of the wonderful book of Psalms. Next week, we will be learning about Psalm 8, Glory of God in Creation.